Hey everybody, welcome back to Video Game Esoteric and a continuing series on the MiSTer FPGA DE-10 Nano project. And today this is a viewer request. We're going to be taking a look at the widescreen support in the PlayStation 1 core because it is here and it is an option. Because normally PlayStation 1s were designed with 4:3 aspect ratio CRT televisions in mind, and if you grew up with PlayStation 1 you're going to know that they have a certain look to them. Now maybe you didn't grow up with 4:3 TVs, but this is what Crash Bandicoot 2 normally looks like, and this is what Crash Bandicoot 2 looks like with the widescreen hack applied. This is not stretching the image. This is actually allowing for more visible area on the left and right to be rendered. Because even though the 4:3 aspect ratio may be what the developers intended, there is elements of polygons and other bits of data off the screen that can be shown in certain games. And that's a really interesting thing to think about, because you'll see here, I'm rolling this backwards just for fun, everything looks perfectly fine, and if we turn on that widescreen hack, it goes to widescreen, but you might notice something at the edges of the screen starting to disappear, and I will explain what that is shortly. It doesn't really matter. It's not a mistake in the hack. It's just how the software works and renders things with the hardware in conjunction. Let's move over to Ridge Racer Type 4. I'm showing you the 16:9 aspect ratio on the left and the 4:3 on the right, and you will see that those windows do not line up, and that's because the aspect ratio or the measure of width by height is different on both of them, and both look spectacular. I love Ridge Racer Type 4, so either way you slice it, it's going to be amazing. But in widescreen, it is so much fun. Now I get that there's other emulators that can do this. This is not a MiSTer feature that nothing else can touch, but I love it for what it's doing. Now I will say that every once in a while you are going to see some glitches. That might be part of the hack, that might be part of the way that the hardware renders the polygons off screen. It's going to be a variable in each circumstance, but going underneath this tunnel with all the lights in Ridge Racer Type 4 in widescreen, this is exactly what I wish it was like back in the day. I don't miss the 4:3 aspect ratio. I did used to make films in it, and I much prefer widescreen, although from a nostalgia factor, 4:3 is still fun. But let's compare something directly up against itself, side by side here. First we're going to do a round in Tekken 3 with widescreen on, then we're going to go to 4:3. And the eagle-eyed among you may notice there's some slight texture glitching on the left-hand side of the screen that's going to disappear completely when we go back to 4:3 aspect ratio. So what's basically happening is in each independent game, there is data off-screen. The GPU might be rendering it and sending it to the video chip, but it's not being shown. And depending on how it was programmed, you'll see different things. Now the one thing this hack does not do is anything for 2D. Take a look at that circle right there on top of the pillar. I'm sure it's marble. I'm sure Dracula has good tastes. And let's go to on. That circle now becomes an oval. This hack will stretch any 2D elements horizontally. All 3D elements will just appear as normal. Look at this line that I put on this wall here with the widescreen hack. You'll see the overall width of that wall. And when we switch back to not having the widescreen hack on, you're going to see that suddenly that line is much wider than the wall that it is in front of. That's because the sprites and the 2D elements are being stretched. This hack is not good for 2D games, nor was it ever intended. But I know I mentioned earlier with Crash Bandicoot 2 some of the weirdness at the edge of the screen, and if you notice here it's a little dark, but you'll see it shortly even better. Polygons are going to start popping in and out at the left-hand side and the right-hand side of the screen. That is what is called culling. Just because a polygon isn't visible to the player doesn't mean it's not being rendered off-screen. So developers would cull or remove polygons to make sure that they had overhead on the GPU, because the GPU can render things that are not shown to the player, like maybe the polygons behind Crash Bandicoot are still there. So if you start noticing that things go missing at the left and right-hand side of the screen, that is the polygons being culled. And you can see right here, it's not too noticeable in normal 3D levels in Crash Bandicoot, but this one wall here, you can see those polygons popping in and out of existence, and that is culling. But if you go to a 2D level, now you're going to see it much more dramatically. You would never know this was happening in the 4:3 aspect ratio, but when you move to widescreen and those polygons are culled from the rendering pipeline, you will start to see them pop in and out of existence as you move Crash Bandicoot. But that is not a given. Einhander here, which is also a 2D element game. Obviously you have polygons on screen, but it's played as like a 2D shmup. There is no culling. Culling was programmed in by the developers if they felt they had the need to use it. Some games cull polygons, some games do not at all. So you're going to find that depending on what game you're playing, you will get a different result with this widescreen hack. And that is just down to how the game was programmed. Certain 3D games, like Mega Man Legends 2 here, a 3D quote-unquote platformer RPG, whatever genre it exists in, does not use culling whatsoever. You will not see anything pop in or out of screen on the left or the right for at least the time I played. And I think this game looks spectacular in 16:9 widescreen, especially when we go into the church here, because most elements were always centered on screen for the player. That 2D text box is slightly stretched, but you really can't tell. But everything on the screen that's made out of polygons, which is everything else, has not been stretched. You're just getting to see more of the left and right hand side of the screen that would be rendered anyway. And this priest will not bless Mega Man without money. That's kind of maybe a nod to the church there. But in gameplay, I think the widescreen in Mega Man Legends 2 makes this game look even better. And that's what you're going to start finding with this hack. Some games are going to feel brand new and exciting when you use the hack. Some games are going to feel like the same game except you see slightly more. And some games are going to be a little janky. Croc here, you'll see that we have not culling, but it seems like the polygons are stretching to infinity, or they're having some breakup issues where they render at the edge of the screen. As I back up, I can replicate that. If I go ahead and turn the widescreen hack off, that is going to disappear completely. So your mileage is going to vary as to what's going on in the game you are playing. Some games will work perfectly, some games will be glitchy, and some games may crash entirely because this is making the hardware do something it wasn't intended to do, and that's display a 16:9 image. And any of these issues, this is not at all a reflection on the developer or the other person that helped him with this. It's just an observation of how these games were coded, because most of the errors come down to coding. They're not coding errors, they're just intentions. One of the games that seems to be slightly the worst in my experience is going to be Gran Turismo. You're going to get some really weird polygonal infinity stretching going on here, and it seems to always be in the turns when things are rendering out a little bit far into the distance. It'll be easier to see in a moment, but just keep your eyes on the screen. You notice a little bit of it there, but when we come into this turn up here, we're going to get a lot of it all of a sudden. It doesn't really ruin the game, but obviously this is not the way you want to play, so maybe for something like Gran Turismo, you would want to go back to traditional 4:3 standard definition aspect ratio. Aspect ratios tell a story. I am a filmmaker and I deal in them all the time. 4:3, not much anymore. 16:9 most common, but we have CinemaScope, we have ultra wide. There's a lot of different aspect ratios we can use, and we use them for a reason. It's to kind of put an emotion on screen in a sense of scale. And that's great for PlayStation 1 because some things like Mega Man Legends 2, the scope and scale of that game feels so much larger when you're playing it. Gran Turismo here with the glitches, I would say that honestly being a little bit wider doesn't really change the feel of the game whatsoever to me. But the one that I found the best was Klonoa. Yes, it's made out of sprites, and yes, they are slightly being stretched right now, but it is not that noticeable. But this game in widescreen with those vibrant colors, those great vistas, this looks spectacular, and it feels so much more grand and ambitious when we are playing it in widescreen. So basically with the widescreen hack, your mileage will vary depending on what game you're playing, but this was a viewer request by a lot of people. They wanted me to talk about the widescreen options for the PlayStation 1 core, so here we are. I think they're great, and I hope some of my favorite games work with them. If you have any questions or comments, leave them down below. Hit like and subscribe and all that jazz. Got a Patreon link down below if you feel so inclined. But I'll be back with another MiSTer video next Thursday. I'll have videos throughout the week as well. See you guys next time in Standard Def. Bye-bye.